Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of News Dose, where I give you all of the latest gaming news. And Phil Spencer, head of Xbox, had something very interesting to say when asked about the Xbox Series X and what he thinks will advance technology next generation. His response, though, may have sparked some intrigue and wonder, as he seems to think that the jump for next generation will be much larger than what any of us anticipate, so we will go into that here in just a moment. Also, Final Fantasy VII Remake just released a few weeks ago, or at least the first part, and even though they clearly expanded on the characters and story, it's roughly only around maybe 15% of the original Final Fantasy VII game. Well, the director of the Final Fantasy VII Remake is already talking about the upcoming sequel and when we can come to expect it, and while no official date has been confirmed, what he said is still really interesting in what kind of wait time we are looking at going forward. So stay tuned for all of that, but of course we have plenty of other stuff to talk about as well, so let's go over some of the quick news. Starting off, Gears Tactics is back in the news yet again. Yesterday we talked a little bit about its review scores, as it currently sits at an 82 overall score on Metacritic, so it has moved up a bit since last night, but we got some more good news because it's now currently the best-selling game on Steam. The top 5 selling games for today is Gears Tactics, Remnants of the Ashes, Borderlands 3, XCOM 2 Collection, and XCOM Chimera Squad, which just released a few days ago. I do find it interesting that Gears Tactics is outselling XCOM, which is the game it's highly inspired by, and the fact Gears Tactics is also launching into Xbox Game Pass, but overall both are performing really well, it seems, so that's good, and this is a really good start for Gears Tactics. The question before the release was, can Gears perform well outside of the mainline franchise? And so far, so good. It also shows why releasing Xbox games on Steam is just so important, and even though a lot of people will be using Game Pass to play Gears Tactics, it's selling really well on Steam so far. For a long time, Xbox was only supporting the Windows Store, and I do think that hurt games a lot in the past. With Steam though, these games are just getting so much more exposure, and it's really too bad that they didn't do this sooner, but nonetheless, I'm really happy to see Gears Tactics doing so well during its launch period. Moving on, Moon Studios, the developers behind the Ori franchise, is starting to open up a bit about their next game. As we all know by this point, Moon Studios is incredibly talented. I think both Ori and the Blind Forest, as well as Will-o'-the-Wisps, is among the best Metroidvania games to ever be made, especially in terms of their platforming, so yeah, fans are going to be really excited for what they do next. We don't know too much about this next game so far, other than it will be an action RPG based off of a job listing from last year, but now the studio founder Thomas Mahler is saying that their next game will be focused on humans rather than fantasy creatures. Thomas Mahler notes that it is more difficult with humans because fantasy allows them to get away with more stuff, but honestly, this is a studio that I trust a lot. I do expect them to do very well with their next game, and I will be excited to hear more about it. I like RPGs, so they already have me there, though I will be interested in how they do their art style with whatever this game is. Ori is a gorgeous game with both its character designs as well as the scenery, but that was in a fantasy setting. I'll be really interested in what they can do with a more realistic setting since they are doing humans, but we'll see what happens there. They could end up having a really creative art style even with humans for all we know. And hey, we don't even know what platforms this game will be on just yet, but let me know. Are you excited for what Moon Studios is working on next? Let me know in the comments below. Also, Google Stadia's Connect event went up today, and they had quite a few games to announce for Stadia. Some of these were pretty big games as well, including Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, you have Madden, FIFA, PUBG, which is a really big one, but the one that surprised me the most was Square Enix's hit RPG, Octopath Traveler, which is out today on Google Stadia. The thing is, Square Enix makes no sense to me at all. They released Octopath Traveler on Stadia before they released it on PlayStation and Xbox. I mean, I really shouldn't be too surprised considering this is Square Enix and they are becoming very well known for exclusive and timed exclusive deals. I mean, just look at Final Fantasy VII Remake as an example, which is a 1-year timed exclusive on the PlayStation 4. I mean, the launch trailer for Final Fantasy VII even shows PC footage. Square Enix just never ceases to surprise me, though I am sure that there is quite a bit of money in these timed exclusive and exclusive deals being made with Square Enix. I mean, I get it, it's a business, but I would sure love if they could just release on all platforms day one. It would be really nice for the fans. I digress though. Google Stadia is getting a nice game here in Octopath Traveler, and they are getting a few timed exclusives as well, including Crata, which is a play, create, share type game where you make your own content and upload it for others to play. It looks like an okay game. I don't think it looks amazing or anything, but it looks solid. They also announced Wavebreak, some kind of skateboarding game, and a game by the name of Get Packed. Both of these are going to be timed exclusives for Google Stadia. And they announced the Turing Test, SteamWorld Heist, and Zombie Army for Dead War as free titles coming May for Google Stadia. There's also Ember, which is an odd little title about being a firefighter, though not necessarily a good firefighter. Now, actually, this is the first early access game available on Google Stadia, so it appears they are going to start doing those type of games. But yeah, Google announced quite a few games to look forward to if you are into the Stadia platform. And speaking of Square Enix, the creative director of Final Fantasy VII Remake has talked a little bit about their plans for more Final Fantasy VII Remake games in the future. As we all know, Final Fantasy VII Remake is just the first part. In fact, it's only about 15% of the original game, so that begs the question, are we going to have to wait another 5 to 6 years to play the next game? That would be absolutely brutal for some people. Well, creative director Katase notes that they plan on focusing on smaller sections in order to release them quicker. Now, what exactly does he mean by smaller sections though? How quick will they release, and how many games should we expect? Unfortunately, we don't have all the answers for those questions currently. Katase himself even says they don't 100% know how many parts there will be. He does say that there is speculation on 3 games, but there is no confirmation on this just yet. If they are smaller sections though, this could end up being more than 3 parts. So that's where things get really dicey. They want to release them quicker, so that's why they are splitting the game up into parts, but how much quicker are they wanting to release these games? Well, the development should go quicker just because they should already have some assets from the first part that they can reuse, and they do apparently know how they want the story to be. So that should shorten time of development theoretically. Granted, they also may want to add some better textures, lighting, and things such as that, especially considering they will be releasing on next generation platforms with things like ray tracing. I think for me, the hope is that Part 2 will release 3 to 4 years from now. Hopefully 3, I mean, less time the better, but it all depends on how small these sections will be and how much they want to expand the game, because, you know, the first one was expanded on quite a bit. I mean, this could end up being a really expensive game though, because I know people are looking at this as just Final Fantasy VII, but to be fair, because of how much they are expanding the original story, I mean, I can completely understand this being considered multiple games. I mean, the first part was roughly 30 hours long, and that was just a small portion of the original game. So they are putting a lot of work into the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I thought they did a really good job personally. Hopefully, they don't take too long on the sequel, and they seem hopeful of that as well, so, I mean, you know, hopefully it's true. What about you, though? How many parts do you expect for the remake, and when do you think the next part will release? Let me know in the comments below. In other news, Phil Spencer made a very interesting comment on Twitter yesterday when asked about what he thinks will advance in terms of technology for next generation. He does note that ray tracing will be great. After all, the Xbox Series X should have a big advantage on ray tracing with 52 compute units compared to the PlayStation 5's 36 compute units. Those compute units, of course, are in direct correlation with how well the ray tracing should be, but this is something that I have talked about a few times so far because, yes, ray tracing, if done well, should be very noticeable to the everyday user. It looks phenomenal, though it could be a big hit on frame rate, so we need to see how well it works on consoles. But Phil Spencer did not stop there though, because he mentions DLI very specifically, which stands for Dynamic Latency Input. And he even says that in his view, the feel of games this upcoming generation will change as dramatically as any since 2D to 3D given the CPU upgrade, DLI, memory bandwidth, and the solid state drive. Now that is quite a shocker and something that not many people are really anticipating because the jump from 2D to 3D was absolutely revolutionary for its time. It was such a big jump and is often considered to be the biggest jump in gaming ever made. This is part of the reason that games like Zelda Ocarina of Time and Final Fantasy VII were so iconic for their time. This jump in 3D was huge. Though with that said, Phil Spencer never actually says that the jump will be as dramatic in terms of visuals, and I think that is what's really throwing people off. Rather than the visuals, he instead says it's how they feel, and that is something else I've talked about. The CPU upgrade from current generation consoles are huge, and in my opinion is the biggest difference from last generation. The Xbox One X has a good video card, but its processor was a bottleneck. The same can be said for the PlayStation 4 Pro, and the standard models, the original Xbox One and the original PlayStation 4, are just really outdated by this point, and a lot of that is because the processors that they used, which were never that great even when they originally launched. The Series X and the PlayStation 5, though, is much more balanced this time around. They have both good video cards and processors this time. Of course, the Series X is more powerful and has a better processor, but yeah, both are much more balanced than the last generation. The solid-state drives will also help in terms of load times, as well as should help things like textures load in faster. According to developers, it's also going to allow them to develop games far easier because they will no longer have to work around sluggish, mechanical hard drives. This won't really be seen as much on the consumer side of things, but it is nice to see developers benefiting from this as well. Again though, Phil Spencer is talking about the way games feel, and yeah, the processor and the solid-state drives should help out there a lot. We are going to see things like ray tracing, better frame rate, which is in direct correlation with the processors, and yeah, Phil Spencer did mention DLI as well. Now what does DLI mean though? Well, DLI basically means that they are trying to improve latency on controller input. Nobody likes having missed input while they are playing games, and it looks like Xbox is focusing a lot on this. Though not just with the controller though, but rather they're also focusing on the console to the TV. That should also improve how games feel and play, so Phil Spencer may actually have a point here because this should be a big jump. I think console players right now are just so used to playing games at 30 frames per second with slow load times and bad pop-in, poor texture loading, and things like that they probably don't really notice all that much. So they should be fairly surprised when next generation rolls around a corner and improves on all of these things pretty dramatically. I know I'm excited about all this stuff personally, and I know we often do talk about how games look, but the way they feel is also incredibly important. But what about you? What are you most excited about when it comes to next generation? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways though, that's it for this episode, but if you liked the video, don't forget to hit the bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Peace out.